Howdy, folks. Doing a mic check. David.
I can hear you, Tim. I just have a lot of people are just popping in, and I'm trying to get everyone into the room. I just keep getting pings on my screen here. So I'll give it a minute just because looks like we have about 35 people in, and I know there were probably 40-ish, so I'll give it a minute for anyone to hop on. But thanks everyone for joining us. Hope the weather's good where you are. Okay, well, I won't drag the wait on too long, so let's get started. So I will kick things off. I think most of you know me. I'm David Zismore at the CPUC. This is the first IPRP meeting of 2024. Sorry, I just admitted somebody else. So I think if you had a chance to look at the agenda that I sent out yesterday, the main purpose of the meeting is some of our team are going to discuss their preliminary review of the seismic assessment that PG&E put out a couple of months ago. There will be a more formal, full-fledged report. Hopefully, I think we're on. I think we're on track to get it done by the end of June, which was our target for the time being. So, just so everyone is aware of kind of like the overall scope of it, as we've done in the past, when PG&E does these seismic assessments or seismic reports, our job is to review them and put together a written report, kind of commenting on it and our overall view of it. And then once that is published, then PG&E will have an opportunity to submit a reply. All of that will be posted on the CPUC's website, which I can share later in case you don't have it. It's been shared before. And this information is also going to be shared with the DCISC as part of SB 846 and its consulting. And the order in SB 846 that the DCISC and IPRP consult on seismic issues like this. So we're hoping to have a preliminary, a draft report available to the DCISC so they can look at it ahead of their meeting later next month. But right now we're just kind of discussing. Our team is going to discuss where what they've seen and what they're looking at, and I won't step on anyone's toes, so I'll let them kind of describe it a little more detailed. Just going around, I'll just let the IPRP members just introduce themselves, since we have, I want to say it's like 14 members, just so everyone knows who's who. Just everybody in the IPRP, please introduce yourself and remember to state which agency you're with. I'll start. I'm David Zismore. I am with the CPUC.
I'll go ahead. I'm Tim Dawson. I'm with the California Geological Survey, and just to make things quick, I'll pass it on to Gordon Seitz, who's presenting today.
Yeah, I'm Gordon Seitz with the CGS, and I've been looking mostly at the main geologic factors that influence the update.
I'm Marie Chen, and I'm also with CGS.
I'm Judy Zacharias, and I'm the last CGS person on the IPRP.
Phil, you want to go?
Phil, you're on mute.
That would help if I. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah, I'm Phil Johnson. I'm with the California Coastal Commission. I've been working with Gordon on the looking at the seismic source characterization, and I'm a geologist.
Hi, folks. I'm Joe Street. I'm a senior environmental scientist with the Coastal Commission.
Justin Cochran, California Energy Commission, Senior Nuclear Advisor. At this time, we don't have a standing seismic expert to cover for the IPRP, but I'm taking notes and we'll forward it to our siting staff as required. On a related issue, David, I know Bruce Anderson was trying to log in, but Bruce Gibson, yeah.
And Bruce Gibbs. I'm on the phone now. This is Bruce Gibson. I'm having trouble. It just keeps bouncing me out.
Okay, yeah, well, Bruce, I mean, we can hear you now, Bruce. So yeah, sorry that it's not working. I'm not enough of a tech expert to. I was trying to admit you. I saw you bounce in a couple of times, and I tried to let you in every time. But yeah, sorry about that.
No worries. Let me try one other approach. I may try to log in with the video, but I'm good listening.
Okay. Was that everybody? I couldn't tell if anyone else on the IPRP hadn't chimed in yet. Okay, well, before we get into the report, I just want to give like a quick update on what's going on at the CPUC, because there's several Diablo Canyon related cases going on right now. Let's see. First and foremost, there's the rulemaking, the OIR that's been going on for a couple of years, or almost, I don't know, a little over a year now. R2301-007. So phase one is completed in that proceeding as of last December. There is a phase two that's dealing with some additional issues that are left over from phase one. And I know that the commission is working on a scoping memo for that, which should be out relatively soon. I couldn't give you an exact date on that, but I have seen it myself, so I know it exists. And I think it's going through some final kind of internal hurdles before it gets published, so keep an eye out for that. There's no NDCTP proceedings, the nuclear decommissioning proceedings at the moment, but the Diablo Canyon NDCTP is supposed to be filed by the end of this year. So that's going to be much closer, I assume, to our next meeting. There is another case. Let me just make sure I get the number right. An application A2310-009, which is Diablo Canyon related. It is a proceeding that was ordered to extend the employee retention program funding as per SB 846. So that is active right now. I know several people who are in this meeting right now are active members of that proceeding. And there was a settlement that was issued pretty recently in that. And then, of course, there is the 2025 Diablo Canyon Extended Operations Forecast proceeding, which I assume I'll see some people from this meeting in the pre-hearing conference that happens tomorrow morning. That is the proceeding that will PG&E's application to set the non-bypassable charge to pay for operations next year at Diablo Canyon as the license period starts to end for both units. The Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee, there's a draft resolution out for nominees or candidates for the upcoming open seat on the DCISC. The turnover date on the DCISC is July 1st. Again, a lot of people here already know all this because I've seen your comments on it. But just a heads up, I think it is Dr. Peter Lamb. His term is ending and he is not seeking reappointment. And so one of the 3 candidates that have been chosen by the CPUC will be selected by the chair of the CEC, and hopefully everything is done by July 1st. I'm not going to put any pressure on Justin, but all the pressure's on you, Justin. So that, if my recollection of the CPUC voting meeting schedule is still correct, I think our next, the voting meeting where that resolution gets approved would be June 27th, I think. So end of June is when that resolution should get approved. So I can't think of any other Diablo Canyon related proceedings at the CPUC at the moment. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Gordon. And Gordon, I'm going to share the document that you sent out yesterday so that everyone can kind of look at it as you are talking. And I'm going to kick it over to you.
One other thing I noticed, there are still people in the lobby.
Oh, okay. No, thanks for pointing it out. Got it.
I will share my screen.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, let's go. Here we go. And let's see. I guess I'm. That's trying to go to the full screen here. Why is that not? Sorry about that. There we go. So, let me go to the next. So this is our first look at the Diablo Canyon updated seismic assessment. And our main focus was on identifying the significant updates, what new data was used, and the main seismic sources that were revised are the Hosgri fault and the Los Osos faults. And then we'll have some comments on the ground motions. These are the people that produced this new update. And I just want to point out the regulatory observers were DWR and the DCISC. We were not involved in this process. One issue that we have discussed is like, should we be involved at a similar level as the DCISC for this process, just for efficiency's sake? And I will focus on the Hosgri fault. That's the most significant update in this. I'm hearing an echo here. Am I alone?
That was Bruce, as I was double booked, so I'm back in normal.
Okay.
In normal team via my iPad,
Okay.
so I can see this.
Okay, great. So the focus, my focus is on the Hosgri fault, how that was revised, and in the 2015. So I'll be relating it back to 2015. In 2015, there were 4 sites that were used to come up with a Hosgri fault slip rate. They were the San Simeon onshore work that was based on some trenches and offset channels. Then the newly developed at that time Cross Hosgri slope in this area, Southern Estero Bay and Point Sal. These were based on channels that were offset and seen in the seismic data. The plant is here. And let's go to the next one. These, oh, come on. This gives an idea of what the different sites had as slip rates that were then combined for a slip rate to use in the seismic source model. You could see that the cross-Hosgary slope had the highest slip rate. So on the x-axis here, you can see the slip rate, and the mean was around 2.5 millimeters a year. What was used in 2015 was a combination of weighted averaging of all of these sites with a resulting slip rate that was this gray line, and the mean here was about 1.6, 1.7. And you could see in the update, it moved to a slightly above 2. But the main thing I want you to notice here is that compared to the cross-Hosgary slope, all these other determinations are much lower. And we'll discuss, you know, the reasons of why how they're explained to be lower. So the main update is based on the work that Sam Johnson started, and then here was most recently published by Jared Klusner, USGS in Santa Cruz. And Phil Johnson and myself, we spent a day speaking to Jared and Sam recently about some of this work. But the main thing that they did, and that's published here, is that previously in 2015, the slip rate determination was based on a correlation to sea level. So there's a submerged shore face. Let's see. Seeing here that crosses the fault, and this yellow line shows the amount of offset. And at that time, they made an estimate of the age of this feature based on its water depth of around 70 meters. But sea level is fairly well understood, so that was fairly accurate estimate. But it wasn't fully accepted in the 2015. In the 2015 report, largely because of the chronology, but partly just understanding what the shore face is. So what was done was they ran additional seismic profiles shown by these lines. Then they also cored, and from the cores they were able to gather a very robust chronology based on radiocarbon and OSL, and the resulting number 2.6 millimeters a year plus minus 0.0 was very close to what their previous estimate was, slightly higher. So the seismic line across this feature shows basically the shore face as it formed about 12,000 years ago, and they cored right through it. We're able to get a chronology on it. The thing that was new in terms of the structure of this feature was that there is a mid-shelf kind of deposit that covers this feature that's much younger, you know, around 7,000 years or so. And but it's a fairly uniform thin cover, and it doesn't really change how we're looking at that offset. Here's just to show some of the stratigraphy gleamed from the cores and some of the chronology. And you know, the feature itself is dated with these dates around 11,000 years, 12,000, 10 to 12. And then you have that mid-shelf layer that covers it, but it doesn't really change the interpretation. So there are two publications, one from Medri and the other one was Klusner et al. They both came out last year. So how is it used in the report, in the update from PG&E? They basically, you could see here's Klusner's estimate of the age. You could see it's fairly spiky around almost 12, like 11.7 thousand years. And PG&E revised that to a much wider uncertainty, but skewed somewhat to the younger age. You can see this area here. And then in the 2015 model, comparing it, this was the age from the 2015 model that they used. I mean, the slip rate, sorry. And you could see that they're all clustered around 2.5 millimeters or slightly higher. Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. I'm trying to see where I'm at here. Okay, here we go. So this is again looking at all 4 slip rate sites. And again, you can see that the cross-Hosgry slope update is above 2.5 millimeters a year. And this is what was used as opposed to what the paper showed. Then if you compare the Hosgry fault slip rates, just looking at them in the 2015, you could, I use this figure because it shows actual distances to the site, to the power plant. So San Simeon onshore 60 kilometers, the cross Hosgry slope 40 kilometers, and then only the southern Estero is closer. The Point Sal is just as far south. But the main feature is if you look at the slip rates, you can see again the cross Hosgry slope is the highest. But in 2015, it was weighted the least, partly because of some of those uncertainties. But one thing we really focused on now is the age. Based on the age, this seems to be most representative of the hazard today. Some of these are almost 700,000 years old. And so there's a big question how representative they may be of today. And do they just represent minimum slip rates? Because this is the age of the offset, but you don't know necessarily exactly when that offset started moving on that strand that they're looking at. So these were the weights that they used in their logic tree. So this feature, the cross Hosgry slope, got a 20% rating. This is just to show the update from 2015 to 23. Not a big change, slightly higher at 2.6 for the mean. So now I want to talk a little bit about the weighting. Let me just read this. Due to the more thorough documentation of the cross Hosgry slope age and stratigraphy, there is a greater confidence now than in 2015 that the geological interpretation of the site is correct, and that the slip rate estimated from the site is reliable estimate of the slip rate for the Hosgry fault source near the Diablo Canyon power plant. The weighting of the 4 Hosgry fault slip sites in the 2015 model therefore needs to be revisited. Our basis for reweighting the 4 slip rate sites is qualitative and considers these 3 criteria: the age of the offset, the location of the slip rate site, and its proximity to Diablo Canyon power plant, the confidence that the interpretation of the site provides a reliable result. So just keep that in mind. They basically endorsed that cross Hosgry slope as a slip rate that's representative. So this is the new weighting. Again, applicability of the age. So this was 12,000 is high. I'm not sure why this one's high because it's 200,000 year rate. I would have at least had it as moderate. It's not at the same level in certainty as this cross-Hosgary slope. The Holocene has generally provided the most accurate representation for the current hazard. And then these were low because they were 700,000 years old. Applicability of the site, of the slip rate for the site location, they're calling this moderate, but it's 40 kilometers. In terms of the long ruptures that we expect, I don't know if this makes a large difference. This was explained in the update as relying somewhat on a model of the Hosgary slip rate decreasing to the south. And so that's one question, is that how certain is that? And then the confidence in the site interpretation, again, this was high. So the cross-Hosgary slope, again, is the highest you could see of all the estimates. And the weighting has gone from 20% to 50%. And now I'd like to hand it over to Phil, who will discuss some of the onshore data for the Los Osos fault and the Irish Hills uplift.
All right, great. Thanks, thanks, Gordon. I'm going to try to share my screen now.
Do I have to unshare or am I good?
You might have to unshare. I don't know.
You have to unshare.
Yeah, where is that? Looking for it. Display
Might be top
right
right.
corner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Try top right.
I don't see it there.
Should be like a little box with an X in it.
Yeah,
right next
I
to
know.
the lead button.
But I don't have that window.
Phil, just try sharing yours and see what happens.
Yeah, I've tried a couple of times and that didn't
Let's see.
take off.
Where?
Should I hit take control?
Yeah, how do I? Here we go. You should have it now.
Okay. I try sharing my screen now. Well, let's see. There we go. All right. So hopefully you can see a PowerPoint presentation.
I think you could do a full window, right? That lower on the right side next to that slider.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is the full window on my screen, so I could.
You see that? You don't see your PowerPoint slider on the lower right?
No, I just see the full screen. I have the full screen, but apparently that's not what you're seeing. Well, I will.
Yeah.
There was this swap screens option, but I don't know how Gordon used it. I'm not sure how you get to it though.
I may just unshare here. And I think what I'll do is now.
If you do it like full size slide in like on a separate monitor, that's the easiest. That looks good.
You got it now?
Yeah.
Great. Technology is so much fun. So I'm going to start out talking about, well, the main focus of my segment of this presentation is on the Irish Hills. And Gordon and I have been spending a lot of time talking to a number of researchers, those working on the Irish Hills, those who have worked on the Irish Hills. And we've also been reviewing a lot of various publications to kind of get a better handle on the tectonic setting. And there are several changes, or I should say a few changes from the 2015 report to the 2024 report, and I'm going to highlight those first. The rate of tectonic uplift was reduced to account for regional isostatic uplift in accordance with the estimates from the work of Alexander Sims et al. This was not, the rate of uplift wasn't huge to begin with, and this reduced it by maybe a small percentage, or not a huge percentage at least. And then they also, based on reduced uplift of the Irish Hills, the slip rate for the Los Osos fault was recalculated for each of the 3 structural geologic models originally identified in the 2015 report. So, you know, they're still basically adhering to the structural models that were previously used, which, you know, haven't really been improved upon in the intervening 9 years. The 2024 report also includes a discussion of the modeling of the Hosby Fault and the uplift of the Irish Hills by the McConnell and Turner, a paper from 2023, but that was not used to modify the uplift rates for the Irish Hills. I'm going to go into that in more detail, that model, as we a little bit later in the presentation. So I just wanted first to just touch on the regional geologic or tectonic framework of the southern coast ranges, bounded on the east side. Can you see my cursor here?
Yeah.
By the San Andreas Fault, and on the west by the Hosby Fault. This is the region that we're looking at, the southern coast ranges, and in a little east of our area of interest, we've got the sort of the topographic highland bounded by the west Huwazna Fault and Oceanic Fault, and then farther to the west, this somewhat lower topography area where whereas in the kind of the core of the coast ranges, we have mostly northwest striking dextral strike slip faults, as well as reverse faults and folds that are most with this kind of north 30 west orientation. But as you get farther to the west, in this area, we've got a somewhat different orientation of folds and faults, north to north 60 west orientation, and these structural blocks that are in this kind of westernmost coast ranges. I also want to point out at the southern end of the coast ranges, we've got the transverse ranges, which were rotated in during the Miocene and the opening of the LA Basin, but the kind of continued compression along these east-west trending faults, like in the northernmost of these is the Santa Ynez River Fault. So between this fault and farther north, we have this region where we have this sort of north 60 west trending, more westerly trending folds and faults. And 2 structural blocks we're going to be talking about, the Irish Hills here down in the north by the Los Osos Fault, at least as mapped, and on the south by the San Luis Bay Fault and the shoreline. The shoreline is actually a little more off to here, but the San Luis Bay, and also called the San Luis Range Fault on the south side. And then farther to the south, we have the Casmalia Hills, bound in the north by the Casmalia Fault. So just going to go into more about this Casmalia Hills area to the south. There's some new data that was published recently. So this is from a paper by McGregor and Onderdonk from 2021 in Geosphere. They looked at this region, specifically at the Casmalia Hills. And again, this is of interest to us partly because of the obvious structural similarity to the Irish Hills, San Luis Range area that we're more concerned with. But also it's, faulting down here might present a seismic source, though 27 to 30 kilometers away, not as immediate as within the Irish Hills. So So anyway, we're going to be looking at this in this area in further detail. Next slide. So McGregor and Onderdonk looked at the Orchid Formation, which is shown here in red, and they had data from these outcrops and also some borehole data, and then the red showing the outcrop area, and then the blue is the base of the Orchid Formation. And using that, they came up with a structural model for the Casmalia Hills, which of course you can see all these sort of north 60 west trending folds and faults. So we're going to look at this cross-section line 2 right here. I also want to point out in yellow they have uplift rates for these folds that they've determined based on modeling of the folds. So this cross-section here kind of shows how the results of their modeling of the folds and coming up with this thrust fault, the Casmalia faults, and which is a blind thrust according to their model. And so this is maybe of significance as far as given the proximity to the Irish Hills and the parallels of the two uplifts. And we're kind of asking whether this is a reasonable analog for the Irish Hills, and modeling showing the potential for this sort of a thrust fault. Next slide here. Another thing about this of interest to us about the Casmalia fault is where it intersects the Hosgri. This sort of thrust fault could be thought to be taking up some of the compression, taking up as compression some of the slip on the Hosgri, and that might explain the reason where we see much lower slip rate farther to the south along the southern end of the Hosgri. Of course, other explanations are that this much older buried channel site has a lower slip rate than the cross Hosgri slope because it's an older feature that represents a minimum slip rate, and because of potential varied slip over time. Another explanation would simply be that as we go farther to the south on the Hosgri, that we're just losing slip. Another important study that was done during this sort of time between the 2015 report and the most recent update is one by O'Connell and Turner, and that using a modeling approach looking at the transpression along the Hosgri fault, they were looking at the uplift of the Irish Hills here, the westernmost portion of the Irish Hills. And so as you can see here, they're showing uplift shown with these colors as being just a result of transpression along the fault, along the Hosgri here. And then they compared that with known uplift rates based on the terraces on the along the southwest and western portion of the Irish Hills, and the predicted or modeled uplift was at least compatible or with or similar to what was shown based on the studies of the terrace. So I guess one of the real questions with that is, though the data indicates some agreement, it also shows that uplift should be diminishing to the east. And so that's a test of that hypothesis. And we understand that ongoing work by the USGS Irish Hills Working Group, which has just recently started working on the uplift of the Irish Hills, may be able to test that hypothesis and determine whether there's the uplift we see is the result of transpression just along the Hosgri fault, or whether it's result of other factors, and most importantly are the faults that bound the Irish Hills. Whether those are responsible for the uplift, whether it's due to reverse faulting along the northern boundary, the Los Osos fault, or whether it's due to more just to do this this transpression along the Hosbury. So that's kind of an area of ongoing research that we have had communication with Devin McPhillips who's involved with the Irish Hills Working Group. So yeah, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the Los Osos fault, which is right at the very north end. It's mapped right along the very north end of the Irish Hills, and also mapped offshore. And that's been thought for quite some time to be responsible for the uplift of the Irish Hills, some sort of reverse faulting, I suppose maybe a thrust faulting, would be the hypothesis for the uplift of the Irish Hills. And of course, there are numerous, there are three different models, one of which calls for simple reverse faulting uplift along the northern boundary, along the Los Osos fault, other that would call for more south boundary faults being the operative features causing an uplift. And then a third hypothesis where it's more of a oblique slip on the Los Osos fault. And that third hypothesis does seem to have some interesting components there, at least that could be viewed through the lens of the offshore data, where work by, this is from Watt et al. 2015, but Sam Johnson and Janet Watt, others at USGS and Santa Cruz, have looked at the faults offshore and the offshore Los Osos fault, where it's a broad zone of a number of with folds and reverse faulting, but also vertical faults with flower structures indicating strike slip faulting. So it remains to be seen whether we're seeing more strike slip or reverse faulting along the Los Osos trend, and a lot really has yet to be determined with the structural model for the Los Osos and also for the Irish Hills. So this slide is to sort of talk more about the offshore faults. The Los Osos fault, we've got this zone that's been investigated somewhat, but it calls for a little bit more detail. Talking with Sam Johnson, it sounds like they haven't really prepared, done the detailed seismic reflection work to really understand the Los Osos fault and offshore. And our hope is that with this potential for oblique faulting, that in the offshore zone in Los Osos and Casmalia fault, we may be able to see some evidence for piercing points that could be offset by strike slip faulting or oblique slip faulting. And so that's an area of potential further investigation. So here are my concluding points. PG&E's 2024 update report does not discuss or reference recent work on the nearby Casmalia fault, and we think that this is something that may be of value as a potential analog. And McGregor and Onderdonk estimated an uplift rate of 0.9 to 4.9 millimeters per year at the crest of two major anticlinoria, and a dip slip rate of 5.6 to 6.7 millimeters per year for the Casmalia fault itself. By contrast, the uplift rate for the proposed for the Irish Hills is much lower than estimated for the Casmalia Hills. And recent study of the Casmalia Hills is important because it may inform the kinematics and style of deformation in the region, especially given that the uplift of the Irish Hills is poorly understood, as evidenced by multiple models for the uplift of the Irish Hills. It's important to consider lateral slip on the Los Osos and Casmalia faults. Existing offshore seismic reflection data for the Los Osos fault show local vertical faults and flower structures within a broad zone indicating strike slip deformation. And this is something that's really might be worth looking at more with additional offshore seismic reflection data focusing in detail on the Los Osos and Casmalia faults may identify features that could yield rates of strike slip deformation. Additional onshore investigation is also needed to better characterize the Los Osos fault and evaluate these competing geologic models. We understand that those data don't exist, and multiple models are probably appropriate when with a lack of data. However, it would be worthwhile to try to investigate further to improve that. The current data set is not adequate to distinguish between these competing geologic models. So that's the presentation, and I think I will turn it
back to me.
Go back over to, and I'll unshare the screen and back to Gordon.
Great.
Looks like there's a question from Sam Blakesley.
Yes, thank you. Just a quick one. If I understood correctly, the proposition is that maybe Casmalia is an analog for what we're seeing in the Irish Hills. To what degree has work been done to determine whether or not the San Simeon earthquake, which was just to the north and was a thrust event, might also be an analog, and what work has been done on that question?
Would hope someone from PG&E would answer that question. I don't know.
Yeah, this is
I mean,
this
that
is
seems
Chris
like a more
Madugo.
obvious analog, and it's one that generated magnitude 6.6 right in our neighborhood and killed people in the county. And I'm imagining there's quite a bit of very good data on that. So I'm just wondering, if we haven't looked at San Simeon, if we looked at Casmalia, why?
This is Chris Madugo from PG&E. Can you hear me? The San Simeon earthquake was studied in detail by PG&E after the earthquake occurred, and lessons learned from that earthquake were incorporated into those models for the Irish Hills. So that was studied pretty extensively and accounted for. With respect to the Casmalia fault, there have been sensitivities in terms of hazard from that fault. Sensitivities show that the primary hazard to the plant is from the faults right in the nearest vicinity. As you move away from the plant and you get tens of kilometers away, those faults in aggregate accounted for 1% of the hazard, aside from the San Andreas, which was a few percent of the hazard. We did discuss the Casmalia fault during our initial working meetings, and then based on the sensitivity analysis, decided to focus on the faults near the plant because those were most hazard significant.
No, that makes perfect sense. Obviously, the faults near the plant are the ones that are relevant versus those, as you mentioned, many kilometers away. There is this larger question of uplift rates, and the claim that uplift rates in the Irish Hills are markedly lower than Casmalia. Obviously, we have what I think could be an interesting analog just to the north, which has been quite active. So anyway, input maybe for future discussion as to whether or not we can include that in the analysis of uplift rates to try and better understand the Irish Hills.
Right. And not to get too much into the weeds, the San Simeon earthquake likely occurred on the West Wasna fault that was discussed during the previous slideshow. There is a major structural boundary between the transverse ranges and the coast ranges right in the vicinity of the Casmalia fault. And so there are structural differences. From the data that we have, it does look like faults are steeper to the north of that structural boundary, north of the Santa Maria Basin. So a lot of this has been looked at and evaluated in detail.
Right. One thing I might want to add is when we looked at the Casmalia fault paper, we weren't looking at it so much as a source, but rather as something that informs us what's going on closer to the plant in several ways. And one way is, the slip rate that's in the 2015 model for the Casmalia fault was 0.5 millimeter a year, if I recall correctly. And this paper suggests a magnitude higher slip rate of 6 millimeters a year. And so that has implications for the kinematics on the Hosgri fault, but also just the structural model. Like, does it change the structural model for the Irish Hills, or does it inform it somehow, perhaps change the weighting of how we look at the different structural models? So that's what we were kind of looking for when we looked at this paper. But we could do the discussion, I think, when I finish what I'm talking about on the Hosgri fault, because maybe then it'll all, is that okay?
Yeah.
Share.
And Gordon, this is
Yeah.
Bruce. That was really where I wanted to come back to, because as I recall, in calculating the hazard from the Irish Hills, the thought of any kind of transpression or compression was significantly downweighted in the previous analysis. And I'm just curious as to what you and Phil's analysis suggests about the appropriate weighting going forward.
Okay. So am I sharing my screen again? Yeah. So I'm circling back to the weighting of the different slip rate estimates on the Hosgri fault. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and go to another study that was done in 2016. Let's see. Come on. Let's see. This was a study, independent evaluation of the Hosgri fault slip rate based on a structural analysis of the pull-apart basin linking the Hosgri and the San Simeon fault systems, done in 2016. This was done in this area. And I'm not saying that the results from this study are correct. I'm just saying they weren't addressed in the update, and it would have been nice to see what the interpretation is of this. I'm just going to run through some of this study quickly. It's not the main point of what I'm making, but basically this study was done here. The cross Hosgri slope is here. Plant is here. And they used older seismic data that showed a step over in this area with a pull apart basin, looking like that in a seismic line. And they used different unconformities to try to estimate slip on the Hosgri. So the deformation of these unconformities for the subsidence. So this was their model, basically with a step over and a half graben. Now there are issues with this because an earlier study from Sam Johnson in 2012 shows that there is no step over. The fault is through going with a slight bend. So some of the assumptions of this model are clearly not correct. But regardless, these are the results that I think, for completeness sake, should be addressed. And that is, what they show is that there is these are a different, this is going through the basin, south to north, and these are the different age unconformities. The ages are listed up here. But the general signal that they assert is that the younger unconformities have a much higher slip rate than the older unconformities. So 20,000 year rate is showing a max here of 4 millimeters. And the oldest are down in the 0.5 millimeter range. The oldest unconformities that are, okay, this is another way they plotted it, where you have the age of the unconformity over time, and then the calculated horizontal slip rate. And I'm not saying that we fully evaluated this, but we are, the striking signal that they assert is that slip has possibly increased more recently. And then their final result is a slip rate of about 2.2 millimeters a year here shown. So back to this. So these are the 4 sites. The applicability of the offsite feature in terms of age, that's in question here, especially this one here that's 200,000 years old. I don't think that should be ranked as high as a Holocene rate around 12,000 years. The applicability, I don't put a lot of weight into this because it's based on this model locally near the plant that the slip rate is decreasing. Over regional distances, it's fairly clear that the slip rate decreases. But in the area that we're looking at, there's not a lot of data to show clearly that it decreases. And in light of the Casmalia fault study, where the slip rate on the Casmalia modeled fault has increased from 0.5 millimeter to 6 millimeters, and that is that would perhaps indicate that the slip rate's fairly constant in the reach that we're concerned with. The other issue with this slip rate location is that we're looking at what we're mostly concerned with are ruptures that are of a length scale where that doesn't seem to make a huge difference, like whether you're 20 kilometers north or south, like versus just adjacent to the site, is not clear that that is a high impact. And then the confidence of the site interpretation was highest at the cross-Hosgry slope. So I just want to leave you with the final thought. Here are the ages. And we're not interested in what happened 700,000 years ago. We want to know what the seismic hazard is today. And the best approximation of that seems to be a Holocene rate. And there's many reasons for that. But our main point is that the 23 update weighting of the slip rates is one of the most controlling factors. And the alternative of weighting the cross-Hosgry slope fully at 1.0 can't be dismissed. And that's one thing that we're questioning. Like, if you take lesser data, lesser quality data that's less representative of the slip rate, and you average that into your highest confidence determination, then you're lowering the slip rate. And it's one thing if the slip rates were kind of randomly distributed, but we're averaging it with slip rates that are always considerably lower. And we see that as a possible problem. And that kind of concludes, and we're ready to take some questions or discuss this further. And I will stop sharing.
And Gordon, what would that slip rate be if you just use the Holocene figure? Sorry, I missed that number.
Around 2.6.
Thank you.
2.6. I mean, I would take the rate. If you take the rate from Klusner et al., that would be 2.6 plus minus 0.8. I'm not sure if they're in the room here, if Sam Johnson or Jared are in the room, if there's questions directly about that rate. Any other comments?
John Giesman, I saw that you had your hand up.
I did, David. Thank you. While we're on the subject of the San Simeon fault, at the last Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee meeting, my client, the Alliance for Nuclear Responsibility, raised the question as to whether PG&E had ever done the deterministic study that the Energy Commission had requested in 2008 of the impacts of a San Simeon earthquake directly beneath the plant. That was 16 years ago. 4 years later, after no visible progress, the Public Utilities Commission in decision 1209-008 had said, you know, the advanced seismic studies that the ratepayers paid for were supposed to cover that review of the San Simeon earthquake directly beneath the Diablo Canyon plant. That was now 12 years ago. I asked the question in February at the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee meeting and was asked to present it in writing to PG&E, which I did, and I sent a copy to the independent peer review panel. Still haven't received a response from PG&E. So I'd repeat the question that I asked then. It's in 3 parts. Has PG&E done the study? If not, why not? If so, will they submit it to public review? Pretty simple, 16 years of runaround. And I think the panel ought to do something about that.
This is Chris Medugo for PG&E. I can answer that question. So the deterministic analysis for a San Simeon type event beneath the plant was done as part of the shoreline report. If you review that report, that does have a deterministic analysis of reverse faults beneath the plant, similar to the fault that ruptured in the San Simeon event. The AB 1632 studies collected more data, onshore and offshore data, and there was a sensitivity, deterministic sensitivity done to see if those results changed. That's in one of the final chapters of that report. So we felt that that covers the mandate of doing that deterministic analysis.
Okay, thank you. I'll take a look at those documents. I wish you had put that in writing in response to my February letter.
And if it is put in writing, please identify where in the 2015 report those numbers can be found, because I remember looking through the report, but I don't remember that analysis. So I would look forward to seeing that as well.
Okay, if there are no further questions, I want to move along because I think we're a little over time. PG&E, I don't know if it was Jeff who was going to do the presentation for PG&E just on what's going on with the LTSP project at the moment. But Jeff, yeah, I suppose you should be the one to start for your team.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. And good afternoon. And Josh, do you want to go ahead and make a quick statement that I could take on? After?
Sure, yeah, I just want to say hey to everybody. I know you're used to seeing Mark Krause here. He says hello from the base of the Grand Canyon. I hope he's making good progress across it. And I'll be taking some notes back to him. But yeah, I'm on the state government relations team and normally just in the CEC world. So I'm excited to be getting some exposure here and yeah, happy to be joined. So yeah, take it away, Jeff.
All right. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jeff Bachhuber, Director of the Geosciences Department at PG&E. The Geosciences Department leads the seismic study and also manages our long-term seismic program. Chris Medugo and Albert Cockey will be walking through our presentation. It is focused on an update of our current activities under the long-term seismic program. This is something we annually summarize for the IPRP. We are considering information lessons we learned during the recent seismic update. So you'll see that Chris will point out some particular projects that we are undergoing. I wanted to note that we are taking notes. A lot of the questions you're asking we'll need to evaluate and we can respond formally. We would request, David, that we could receive a list of the questions also just to make sure we don't miss anything. We're trying to make responses as we can for things that are pretty simple to respond to during this meeting, but that we will have a follow-up. And with that, Chris, I'll turn it over to you to go ahead and launch your presentation.
Yeah, can you let me know?
Yeah, and I'm sorry, Chris. I do want to introduce, so Chris Medugo is our lead for the seismic source characterization work, and Albert Cockey is for our ground motion work. And so they're kind of splitting the presentation along those two lines.
Okay, can you see my opening slide?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's come up.
Okay, excellent. So the bulk of this presentation, as Jeff said, is going to focus on activities that have been mostly going on concurrently with the SB 846 studies. The last time we talked about our ongoing activities was a little over a year ago, in May of 2023. So I wanted to take a little time to bring you up to speed. As we usually start our slide decks, I just wanted to remind folks that are new to IPRP meetings that we have a commitment to seismic safety. The NRC included a condition in the operating license for Diablo Canyon Power Plant to continue to study and evaluate seismic information and perform updated seismic studies. And that's what we do under the long-term seismic program. It began in 1985. It established a geosciences department staffed with experts that could oversee seismic studies with research collaborators. We also operate a strong motion accelerometer array, the Central Coast Seismic Network. And we have a continuing commitment to run the LTSP for the duration of an extended operating license. So for my short presentation, I will briefly touch upon the SB 846 report. I will give an update on the last year of seismicity from the Central Coast Seismic Network. And then I will provide a brief Diablo Canyon focused research update. So on the SB 846 seismic assessment, the report was completed in February. Findings were presented at a public DCISC meeting on February 22nd, 2024. We did have a follow-up discussion with the DCISC to answer questions during one of their regularly scheduled visits to Diablo Canyon Power Plant. And we have now posted the report on the PG&E Seismic Safety website. It took a little while to post because it had to go through ADA compliance review. So we will make this a slide deck public, and there's a live link on the slide deck that will take you to the report and to older reports. Right now, the website has the SB 846 report, the studies related to the Shack 3, and then the Central Coast Seismic Imaging Project reports. The shoreline report that I mentioned and the older late 80s, early 90s LTSP study will eventually be put on the site after they go through ADA compliance review.
And Chris,
so
the SB 846
yeah.
report had been shared in the emails running up to this meeting, so everybody should have at least had an opportunity to take a look at it.
Exactly, and I think that Gordon and others have had the report for a while now. DCISC has had it since February, so this is just for the public dissemination. Just quickly review the SB 846 findings. So continued research since 2015 identified minor changes in source characterization that resulted in no significant increase in seismic risk. The update found no new seismic information that would change the 2015 assessment conclusions that were reviewed and accepted by the NRC. And then a couple of quotes from the closure letters. So we had a participatory peer review panel and then an external review panel associated with the SB 846 assessment. So the PPRP agrees with the conclusion that the new information for the SSC and GMC that has been developed since 2015 seismic hazard studies does not significantly change the estimate of the seismic risk for DCPP. Gordon, I think I'm getting some noise from you. Maybe you can mute. The UCLA Garrick Risk Institute External Peer Review Panel, the quote is, provided multiple comments on the evaluation process and technical issues covered in the DCUSA draft report. These comments have all been considered by the TI team of the DCUSA, and the report has been updated accordingly. The EPRP agrees with the findings of the studies as documented in the final report. So that ends my short section on SB 846. Here's an update on seismicity from the last year. So the map on the left shows seismicity over the last year in orange. You see some scattered dots overlaying on seismicity since 1975 to provide some context for the seismicity. Late last year, there was a magnitude 3.1 earthquake that occurred in an area where there had been clustered seismicity in the past. There was also a magnitude 2.8 aftershock a few days later that occurred to the northwest. These earthquakes are consistent with the locations of past seismicity. And taking a figure from the 2015 report showing seismicity relocated by Hardebeck, the colors represent depths of seismicity. And then you see our different background source zones. One shaded yellow is the local area source zone that has the highest impact on Diablo Canyon. And these zones account for seismicity and moment rates on faults that are not well characterized, like the principal faults around the plant. And so the magnitude 3.1 earthquake and the aftershock are highlighted with a black circle, and they are at similar depths to past seismicity, and they're captured in these background source zones. And then in terms of the style of faulting, as was discussed earlier, the Irish Hills, one interpretation is that deformation in that area is transpressional with a mix of strike slip and reverse or thrust fault earthquakes. And so the magnitude 3.1 earthquake had a reverse dip of 51 or 40 degrees, depending, reverse or thrust, depending on which nodal plane you choose. But the important thing to note here is that past seismicity in that area has had similar focal mechanisms. So now moving on to published research in the last year. I've mentioned much of this in past update meetings. Much of this research took years to complete and publish. Here for seismic source characterization, I've got the Haasgreave fault slip rate study that Gordon was talking about, and by Jared Klushner. This work, I want to note, was funded in large part by PG&E and then had contributions by USGS and other partners. And then the coastal uplift model, where the Haasgreave fault is driving uplift of the Irish Hills, or the western part of the Irish Hills, by O'Connell. That was also published late last year. From the ground motion perspective, there was a special issue on non-ergodic ground motion models and hazard that was published in the fall of last year. Much of the work in this volume was sponsored by PG&E. And if you step back and you think of what uncertainties have the most impact on hazard for seismic hazard for Diablo Canyon, most people focus on source and slip rate of the Haasgreave fault or faults beneath the Irish Hills, but the largest uncertainties are in ground motion models. And moving to fully non-ergodic ground motion models is where the community is going to reduce those uncertainties, and PG&E sponsors a lot of that research to reduce those uncertainties for Diablo Canyon and our entire system. Lastly, an update on selected research activities. Gordon, I believe, mentioned Uplift or the Irish Hills Working Group. That's a USGS group that's working on uplift of the San Luis Pismo Block, Central Coastal California. And so under the USGS CRADA, they're looking at tectonic deformation and fault activity for marine terraces, geomorphology, and fault studies. This is important because there is some uncertainty in the ages that were developed for that Casmalia fault paper that was discussed earlier. Those ages were developed using optically stimulated luminescence, or a version of that called IRSL. It seems like those ages may be too young, according to some reviewers. And so some of the work that we're doing with USGS is to better understand whether that dating method really works on coastal terraces and marine deposits. We're also working with consultants to do mapping and dating in the Los Osos Valley of marine terraces and deposits on both sides of the valley to test uplift models for the Irish Hills. And then we're also working with USGS on next generation seismic analysis techniques to better understand seismicity and fault geometries beneath the Irish Hills and Central Coastal California. On the ground motion side, we've presented multiple times to the IPRP about use of precariously balanced rocks as a constraint on hazard. There are published papers in the literature, or there is a published paper in the literature that suggests that precariously balanced rocks in the vicinity of Diablo Canyon would reduce hazard by up to 30%. But we don't believe that that methodology is mature enough yet to apply to hazard for the plant. And so we've been continuing analysis, hosting or sponsoring workshops. It sounds like to develop really useful PBR constraints, you will need implementation of non-ergodic ground motion models. And so this is an area of ongoing study that we are sponsoring around the plant. There was a large thrust earthquake in Japan that occurred January 1 here, January 2nd there. There have been contentions raised that earthquake is an analog for a type of earthquake that could occur beneath the plant. Earthquakes like this are included in the existing model for the plant, but as part of the LTSP, we do look at earthquakes around the world where we can learn things that would be applicable to our source model development, ground motion model development, and plant operations. Since that earthquake occurred, we met with Japanese electric operators to discuss impacts to a nuclear plant in the epicentral area. And we're evaluating lessons learned that can be applied to our hazard model. And then lastly, focus areas for updating the LTSP in the future. We're going to continue working on development of non-ergodic ground motion models, continue work on application of fragile geologic features, continue to work on reducing uncertainty and seismic source parameters. And that includes evaluation of geodetic models, how those could be applied to the Diablo Canyon source model for site-specific hazard assessment. And that concludes my presentation.
Thanks, Chris. Are there any questions to ask right now?
Hey, David, there's no,
this is-
I don't have a question, except for I do want to look back that we skipped over one of the presentations. Rui Chen was going to present on the ground motions.
Oh, okay.
On the agenda.
How much time would that take?
I'm not sure.
I'm
Hopefully she's still here.
thinking, I'm thinking about 15 minutes. If we don't have time, I'm happy to skip.
No, I
don't
think
know.
we have enough time. And yeah, sorry, Mr. Peter Bird was going to present after. So Peter, if you're okay waiting a few extra minutes, I think we should still have enough time to do your presentation and Rui's.
Okay, do you want me to go first or?
Yeah, go first so we can kind of lump everything together, I think, as best as we can.
Okay, I will share my screen then. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm just gonna follow pretty much the structure of the PG&E updated seismic study report. And this is going to be also the draft outline that I'm thinking for our IPRP review report, unless there are some other opinions. So I'm grouping the review into three main parts. The first one is new ground motion data, and the numbers in parentheses are numbers of chapters that I reviewed. The second part is hazard re-evaluation, and I'm grouping ground motion characterization for reference rock site condition, including vertical ground motion, site characterization, and site vectors, and hazard calculation and results all into the second part. The last part is control point hazard. So for each of these items, I'm just going to start with a very brief summary of PG&E's 2023 evaluation. I guess it's 2024 rather. And it's going to be brief, or I might just skip a lot of the details. And I'm going to follow by our preliminary review comments, and then any suggestions or questions, if any, or editorial notes. I want to note that this presentation really just represents my own opinion because other IPRP members have not had a chance to review. Okay. So the first part is new ground motion data. PG&E evaluated 3 new or improved recorded ground motion data sets for sensitivity studies. That includes a preliminary data set of the 3 large 2023 earthquakes that occurred in Turkey, a data set that they searched and selected specifically for DCPP, and a subset of ongoing NGA West 3 data. They also assessed simulated data, which is the SCEC broadband platform and Cybershake, and they found no new broadband platform data. There are new Cybershake data, but with limited 3D velocity structure and frequency range. And also it was more on the regional scale. So PG&E decided not to do further evaluation, and I think that's appropriate. PG&E also concluded that there are no new data recorded at the DCPP site to refine the empirical site term. And we'll talk more about the empirical site term later. So this is a map from PG&E's report. It shows the DCPP data set, the new data set. It has 7 earthquakes shown by these blue stars, and the red triangles are the reporting stations. As you can see, there's no new data recorded within 50 kilometers of DCPP. as shown by this black circle here. So our preliminary comments, we think PG&E's search and evaluation for new ground motion data thorough and comprehensive. We agree that there's no new data to refine empirical site term. We also agree that simulated data are either not new or not appropriate for DCPP. So the second part, hazard reevaluation, and there are three parts to this. So the first is ground motion characterization for reference rock site condition. PG&E evaluated the performance of the 2015 ground motion models against the three new data sets. They also evaluated new models and the ground motion model sampling approach, which is the Simmons mapping method. I'm going to skip these details and go to our preliminary comments on this subject. We found PG&E's evaluation of the 2015 ground motion models against the new data technically sound. Their search for new models is complete and new model evaluation reasonable. Now, with regard to the median model, we agree that the 2015 ground motion models are still applicable, and this is demonstrated by the good fit to the new data through residual analysis. We agree there's a new ground motion model for active tectonic regions that are applicable to DCPP, and Simmons mapping technology is still current. And PG&E cited that the same methodology or a variation of the methodology have been used in other notable projects and other SHAC Level 3 studies. With regard to aleatory variability model, we agree that the available new data are preliminary and limited in magnitude and distance ranges, so do not allow model update. Now, there are new global models, and PG&E did analyze these models or implement these models, and the comparison with the new model actually show consistency in approach, elements of logic trace, and results. For vertical ground motion, PG&E uses an approach that's called vertical to horizontal ground motion ratio. This approach is most widely used in earthquake engineering. There's another approach that you just go, just like you would do for horizontal ground motion, you use ground motion models. There is a new V/H model, but PG&E decided not to recommend that model, but they actually implemented the model because the resulting ratio of vertical to horizontal ground motion with this new model is actually lower. And also this model relies on a particular ground motion model, which is kind of limited. And I think this is appropriate. There are other new VH models, V/H models, and that are not applicable. And we also agree with this. Now, we do have a couple of suggestions. I would like to see more elaboration on why controlling event being inconsistent with horizontal component is a good reason to reject the GMM approach. Because you actually, when you do deaggregation, you could get different controlling events for different period. So it's no surprising that if you disaggregate vertical ground motion hazard, you get a different controlling events. And I think it should mainly be decided by the structural response. I think the reason may be more practical because the vertical ground motion models are fewer compared to horizontal ground motion models. And also, if you were going to use the ground motion model approach, you would require an entire full PSHA just for the vertical component. Okay, the second part on hazard re-evaluation is site characterization and site-specific adjustment. Just a reminder that these efforts result in empirical site factor and analytical site factors, and these are applied to hazard at the reference site condition in order to get ground motions at the control point, and the empirical site factor and vertical and analytical site factors are weighted 2/3 and 1/3 respectively. PG&E evaluated inputs and methods considering new information. I'm gonna again skip and go to our preliminary comments. So for this part, PG&E did implement the new non-ergodic model, and we think their evaluation of the new model is comprehensive. We did note some inconsistencies between figures and text description, and I will note these in detail in the review report. Now, because there are no new site data, so there's also no updates on some previous IPRP comments. Previously, we had mostly our in ground motion part, our comments are in this part, the site characterization part. So these include previously noticed the inconsistencies between 3D velocity model derived from topographic and surface wave dispersion and the old downhole velocity measurements. We talked about further ensuring that path effect is not mapped into empirical site term. This has not been addressed. Refinement of path effect, that's something good to have. And I recall we talked about, or PG&E talked about temporary 50 station array, some smart meters with accelerometers, data from the ocean bottom, seismometer, etc. Have not seen update on these. It could be just they're discontinued, but we would like to hear updates on them. Also, 3D site response modeling to augment the current 1D analytical approach. And there was also a talk about a 3-year CAPA project to better understand the deep part of the soil model, of the 1D model. Now, in the analytical approach, there is noticeable differences in site factors between the 2015 results and the results using the new host site shear wave velocity profile and the CAPA. This is the only thing that's new in the analytical approach. And so PG&E implemented it and compared them. But we agree that no updates are warranted, given low logic tree weight. Remember, the analytical approach or analytical factor is weighted 1/3. Now, with regard to empirical approach, again, there are noticeable differences in the site factors from the new non-ergodic model compared to the 2015 factors. But then we also agree that changes are not significant because there is already a large uncertainty range in the empirical site factors as shown by these blue dash curves in this figure. The orange curve is the new factor from the non-ergodic, and you can see it's well within the bound. Well within the uncertainty range. Another reason they cited not to implement the non-ergodic model right now is there's just still doubts in the data quality, and it is preliminary in nature. The last part is hazard calculation and the results. Because remember, there's no change in the ground motion characterization. The only change is the changing slip rates for on Husky and Las Osos faults. So PG&E is using a simple scaling approach. And this approach resulted in slight increase in total hazard. The actual amount of increment or increase varies with hazard level and spectral frequency. It is larger increase for lower frequency, but overall there's less than 7% increase in the uniform hazard spectra as shown in this figure here for 3 different hazard levels, and also in the DCPP ground motion response spectra because of the change on the slip rate. So it does increase the hazard somewhat, but pretty insignificant. And that's because Husky slip rate increased more than the decrease in Las Osos slip rate. And also because Husky fault contributes to the total hazard a lot more than the Las Osos fault. So our preliminary comments and suggestions are, we believe scaling approach is appropriate and the results are reasonable. The scaling approach is consistent with the moment balancing approach. Now, I believe it constrains the overall energy release, but it does not constrain how deformation is accommodated over different size events on the fault. And so we have a couple of suggestions. Clear demonstration with equations. Why hazard can be scaled by the same amount as slip rates. Also discuss underlying assumptions. I believe there is an underlying assumption. One of them could be or is that the changing slip rate will not change magnitude frequency distribution for the fault. It changes the overall rate of the events greater than a magnitude that we care about. And also elaborate on rationale for multiplying scaling factors for the mean rate and for the equivalent Poisson hazard ratio. So apparently these two sets of rates are not like alternatives. They both matter, and that didn't come through in a report writing. And there's likely a typo in equation 10 too. Now, the last part is control point hazard for risk assessment. Because there's no change in the 2015 site factors, the hazard curves at the control point can basically be scaled by the ratio of hazard curves from the 2015 study and the updated hazard curves. Now, these hazard curve ratios, they are frequency dependent, spectral frequency dependent. They are also hazard level dependent. So as you see, for 5 Hertz in this figure here, it's lower and then it goes higher. Now, PG&E basically saying that because side factors still apply, so you can use the same factor to scale. You can use the ratio on the hazard curve obtained from on the reference set condition and apply that to the control point set condition, and I believe that's appropriate. They did simplify these ratios to make them hazard level independent by selecting the ratio at 10⁻⁴ hazard level, which is the most relevant to DCPP. And these simplifying factors are listed here. Now, our preliminary comments are that we do believe these hazard level independent scaling factors for control point hazard curves are reasonable, giving overall small change. And also, a good thing about the recommendation from PG&E is they did recommend a binding sensitivity analysis factor, which is 1.233, and that is a conservative number because it's the highest number you can get at the lowest frequency in terms of the hazard curve ratio. That's all I have.
Thanks, Rui. I don't see any questions.
Question?
So, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, hey, thanks. This is Sam again. And I'm not sure if this goes to the source characterization or some of the side effects. So whoever can answer it would be great. So I don't know if you can pull up figure 7.8 in the report, if that's easily done. If not, I can just ask my question without referring to it. Figure 7.8. Is that okay to refer to the report? And sorry, Gordon, I didn't mean to complicate things. I can just make my question without it. You're on mute, Gordon.
What is 7.8?
I'm trying to ask a question about the Turkey earthquake and to what degree information there might be relevant to Diablo.
Yeah, I'll pull it up. Just a
Thanks
second.
a lot.
7.6. Come on.
I found it. Do you want me to share?
Be great.
I've got it. If you just wait a second, I'm just scrolling.
Okay.
Go. Tables. Come on.
Page 157, if that's helpful.
Okay, I've got it. I've got it.
The PDF.
Is that? Do you see that?
I probably need to press something to see the share. I see everybody, but that's okay. So if it's the chart I'm looking at, it shows magnitude in the vertical axis and distance in the horizontal axis.
Just a second. Ree, can you unshare?
I think I did.
You did, huh? Why am I not?
Did I? Am I still? Do you still see my screen?
No, I don't. That's why I'm trying to share and it won't let me. Oh, here we go. You see it?
Yeah.
That's not it. 7.6. Yeah, wait.
There we go. 7 point. Yeah, we're right there. It's close. One more.
So that's 7.6.
It's 7.8.
Oh, sorry.
So it's 2 pages over. Thanks so much.
All right.
Here we go. Upper left-hand corner.
It's so touchy. Damn, I don't know why.
And actually, the very top of that's probably the most important part for my question. Okay. So,
that's good.
Yep. So actually, the left-hand plot is the one we want to look at, not the right-hand plot. There we go. So what this is a plot is what measurements we have of strong motion relative to distance from the earthquake. So the magnitude of the earthquake is in the vertical scale. So you can see at the very top, we have almost a magnitude 8 earthquake. I presume that's the Turkey earthquake. And you can see that we have, with all the sensors and all the events that occurred in Turkey, we had only 3 measurements that were within 1 kilometer of the sensor. And of course, the plant and the shoreline fault is 600 meters. So it's right in that zone. So the reason I'm highlighting this area where there's this paucity of data, I mean, almost a complete absence of data, is that is exactly the distance where we need to make accurate calculations of shaking at the plant due to an event on the shoreline fault. And I believe the last speaker alluded to the fact that we had a big data gap here, which made it difficult to bound uncertainty. I think that was essentially what was being said, and I saw that in the executive summary also. But what I think is noteworthy is that as I pull up the Turkey earthquake, I read, February 6th had a peak acceleration of 2.2 G, and they record 3-4 other stations that were between 1 and 2 G. And then also in California, just last year, we had an event up in Humboldt that had a peak acceleration of 1.48 G. And so the reason I bring this up is I'm very concerned about the initial statement that Chris made that 4 new faults were found, one of which was within 600 meters, but it only resulted in, quote, minor changes in the potential threat to the fault. And I'm really curious with this new information about accelerations well in excess of 1G and even a 2G in this Turkey event, if there's any reason to have concerns about how much shaking could occur at the plant due to a fault within 1 kilometer, which is this range where you all have no data.
Hi, this is Albert Kotke. Can you go to page 161?
Yeah, hold on.
Sam, I think you misunderstood Chris. There were new faults were not added to the source model as a result of this study.
So his comment only pertained to shaking from the Hosgri. Is that what is meant by that? Sorry, could you expand on that so I'm sure I understood what you said?
Oh, in your response, you had noted that we had added 4 new faults, or 4 new faults were found, or something like that.
Since 2008, yes. The shoreline.
And those have all been included in the hazard model that we have, right?
And they have. And my concern was the initial statement was they really made no difference in the seismic hazard. And I understand that was the position.
Oh, okay.
That was taken.
This is Chris. I think I can expand on that. So in terms of the scope of the study, we focused on the 4 faults that were most hazard significant to the plant. Faults that were further away, sensitivity studies from 2015 showed that their contribution to hazard was in aggregate less than 1% for all the faults, except for the San Andreas. That contribution was a few percent. And so that was the basis for focusing our efforts on those 4 faults around the plant: the Hosgri, the shoreline, the San Luis Bay, and the Los Osos fault, and not doing a deep dive for faults that were further away. Although we did look at that paper for the Casmalia fault.
I guess I'm not saying it as clearly as I would like to. I agree with that approach. The faults closest to the plant are the most hazardous. My concern is that in deriving the ground motion equations that attempted to calculate what accelerations would be experienced at the plant, made assumptions that relied upon a paucity of data, an almost complete absence of data. And I'm pulling up that figure to demonstrate that there is no data in the very close range. So I'm agreeing with you. Faults that are far away are less relevant, but I'm very concerned about the faults that are very close proximity. And I'm also concerned that the accelerations that are possible, especially in the near field, with starting and stopping phases and asperities, are much less predictable than one would expect from those regressions using ground motion, depending upon earthquakes that are much further away. And so my question was, Turkey is one of the biggest, newest, most important data sets we've had, where presumably there would be strong motion data in close proximity to the sensors. And I was trying to find out if any of these 2G measurements or accelerations in excess of 1G, if we know what proximity they were from the fault to the sensor.
So Sam, I can't answer that specific question right now, but what I can point to is the fact that, for first of all, yes, everyone agrees that we don't have much data close in. But what we do is we develop ground motion models that scale and have physical basis to them, and they match simulations at very close distances. If we look at the Turkish data and we look at the comparison between the ground motion model and the Turkish data, that's shown in the figure on 713 here on the screen, in the lower figure there. And what we see is that there is no bias in the data within 10 kilometers, right? And there's one point that has a residual of 1, right? That's the ground motion model is over predicting by a log value of 1, a natural log value of 1. But otherwise, it's very consistent. And so even though there were really strong ground motions observed during that event, our ground motion models are capturing that behavior. And so all of the values that you have talked about, those are all included in our ground motion equations. And we pick up a lot of uncertainty and variability in the ground motion as a result of that.
Now, the variability that you are capturing, if we assume that a Hosgri event coupled with a shoreline would produce, I can't remember what your latest report indicated. Was it a 7.5 magnitude as a possibility if the two were linked?
It's higher. It's higher, I think.
Okay. So
I want to say 7.8.
Thank you.
So we include, because it's a probabilistic seismic hazard assessment, we include many different possible ruptures going all the way to above magnitude 8 on the Hosgri and connecting to other faults near the plant.
Well, and what you're saying is that essentially, no matter how large the earthquake is, even up to a magnitude 8, that Diablo is essentially earthquake proof from your models. It's earthquake proof that you've never encountered any earthquake that you've modeled, even with a large variability in acceleration that could exceed the tolerances of a plant. I mean, that's essentially when you say
that's not what we're saying.
Well,
we're saying that the annual rate of exceedance.
Yep.
And from that, right, we talk about rates. We don't talk about absolute values and total maximums. We talk about rates of exceedance, and we look at potential for behavior.
Okay, but we're talking about people who live here, not potential for behavior. So I'm trying to understand, are you effectively saying there is no earthquake that could cause a failure at Diablo? And if you're not saying that, what is that level of acceleration which, if exceeded, would cause damage? And is that possible? I mean, I'm getting down to the, look, I used to represent all the people living in this area, and I'm a scientist. So effectively, I'm trying to wear 2 hats on this call, and I'll hope to get a little indulgence from others who may not live within 8 miles of the plant. The probabilistic analysis is lovely and wonderful, and I've been through it. But I'm trying to understand, given these huge accelerations that we are seeing over and over with these events that previously had never been predicted, if we have those types of accelerations at the floor of the plant, will we have failure? Up to what level of acceleration will the system not fail?
And I can't answer the ultimate capacity question. I do not know that.
Thank you.
So if I could just real quick, and I got a quick question for Ree. I think, Sam, what you're asking really is whether probabilistic seismic hazard analysis is an appropriate policy basis. You know, we have a very low frequency event that has very high impact, and we've offline, certainly I've had this conversation. It's a vexing question, but it boils down to, in IPRP's work, is the question of uncertainty in the assessment of the hazard. And that's where I wanted to go back to Ryu, in terms of your analysis, particularly of the site characterization, which members of the IPRP know that I sort of obsess on. Do I read you correctly that while the analysis is consistent it really doesn't do anything to reduce the uncertainty, which is in fact the top of our so-called tornado diagram. As we look at the at those factors that go into the hazard assessment, the site characterization, the ground motions that are related to site characterization are the most uncertain and thus sit on the top line. And do I read your conclusion correctly that what you see there doesn't reduce that uncertainty?
That's right. There's no change in the site factor for this update, 2023. Yeah. So there's no, because they don't really have data at the site, right, to refine these terms.
Yeah, I think that's from where the IPRP has been. That's key. You know, we have an estimate of the site factor, but there's relatively large uncertainty as to where the bounds of that may be. And while there's analysis of certain new data and different kinds of models, that uncertainty has not been reduced.
Right.
Yeah, this is Jeff Bachhuber. I'll also chime in there. That is the focus of the long-term seismic program, is to reduce the uncertainties, drive research, keep abreast of research in a continual progress to be able to reduce uncertainties over time and integrate that into our models.
Right, and I appreciate that. Absolutely, we understand that to be the case. You know, I think from the IPRP perspective, at least from my perspective on the IPRP, you know, I would like to see maximum effort in the long-term seismic program directed at trying to reduce uncertainties of that site factor. You know, and for instance, I'm not sure that precariously balanced rocks does that particularly effectively, as opposed to trying to understand the material composition near the plant and to try to reconcile the different estimates of that, you know, of the material parameters as we saw, as explained in her analysis of the most current update.
Okay, sorry, I'm going to jump in because we're getting close to time, and I promised Dr. Bird that he would have a few minutes to do his presentation for Mothers for Peace. So Dr. Bird's information was included in the last email I sent yesterday, so hopefully everyone has that, has at least had a chance to look at it a little bit. But Dr. Bird, please, if you, we can go over time, but just, you know, be aware that we're at 3:58. So sorry, yeah, I apologize for that. There's just a lot of, everybody's very interested in all the material here for obvious reasons. So please go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for this opportunity to briefly summarize my March filing in a declaration to the NRC, which has been provided to you as a PDF. This will be the 1.5-page version of that statement. PG&E's 2015 SSC for Diablo Canyon was 652 pages long. Their update is 394 pages long. It is impossible to deconstruct all the problems in these documents in a 2-hour meeting. Perhaps this was their intent. Instead, I will offer an alternative seismic source characterization in 1.5 pages with a very different conclusion. First,
He's frozen on my screen. Is that the case for everyone else? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
That is unfortunate given the timing.
Can we entertain if he? Oh, he's back.
There you go. Sorry, Dr. Bird, you froze there for a second.
Yes, I'm sorry. I have fiber optic internet, so it's not me.
Okay. No, sorry. Yeah, please continue.
Okay. So both of these horizontal compression and uplift indicate active thrust faulting in the basement, which is largely Franciscan complex. Both local geology and global plate tectonics indicate that this new thrusting regime began at 5 to 6 million years ago when Pacific plate motion with respect to North America became transpressive. Known thrust faults include the Los Osos thrust on the northeast side, the San Luis Bay thrust on the south part of the southwest side, and the inferred coastline thrust on the remainder of the southwest side passing Diablo Canyon. But there are also many unknown and unmapped thrust faults in Franciscan Basement, which formed by piecewise accretion during Cretaceous subduction, and these may be reactivated. So how to estimate the net rate of thrust slip on all of these thrust faults? I have three methods. The isostasy method is simple. There is 0.2 millimeters per year of uplift from marine terraces. Isostatically, this implies 1.2 millimeters per year of crustal thickening. By simple trigonometry, that implies 2.8 millimeters per year of thrust fault slip if the thrust dips are a standard 25 degrees. Second method, fault throw method. The inferred throw of 1.6 to 2.2 kilometers on the Miocene Obispo Formation at the shoreline and inferred coastline trace in my figure 1 implies a thrust slip rate of 0.8 to 1 millimeters per year, assuming a 5 million year start and 25 degree dip. Then the rough symmetry of the Irish Hills implies 1 millimeters per year on the southwest and northeast sides combined. Third method, GPS can measure horizontal convergence and then total thrust slip rate is only 10% more. This computation would be very simple if PG&E would release their raw GPS data from Diablo Canyon. Lacking that, my Neokinema models of 2012 and 2022 use 7 GPS stations in a semicircle around the northeast Irish Hills, plus thousands of other GPS stations in the western US, and obtain convergence of about hills in both studies, around 2.2 millimeters per year, much higher than estimated by PG&E. Now, if mean slip in a great thrust X earthquake is about 2 meters, then recurrence times for these thrust earthquakes in the Irish Hills are about 715 years at 2.8 millimeters per year, or 909 years at 2.2 millimeters per year. The Noto Peninsula on the Japan Sea coast of Japan is a tectonic analog, as we have heard, a block of crust rising from the sea because it sits on 2 conjugate thrust faults. Its magnitude 7.5 earthquake of January 1st or 2nd taught us 2 critical things. First, the mean slip on the part of the thrust offshore the peninsula was about 2 meters, according to the USGS finite fault solution, which is why I chose 2 meters of slip as my example calculation. Second, digital strong motion seismograms collected by Professor Shinji Toda of Tohoku University Let me repeat that sentence because there was a glitch. According to the 2018 Seismic Probabilistic Risk Assessment, such shaking will cause seismic core damage at Diablo Canyon. Therefore, seismic core damage frequency at Diablo Canyon is once per 715 to 909 years. This is 37 to 47 times higher than the SCDF estimated by PG&E and accepted by NRC. If the distance is extended for 20 more years, the added risk of seismic core damage at Diablo Canyon will be about 3%. Even if all radioactive materials are contained and no lives are lost, the cleanup costs following any reactor meltdowns will be staggering. More details, arguments, and supporting citations are contained in my March 4th, 2024 declaration to the NRC. Thank you very much.
Jeff, sorry, looks like Jeff, you have a question? or a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that the NRC has responded to Dr. Bird's March filing. You did it, I sent to you, David, and you attached to the meeting invite their May 15th response. Both PG&E, our team has evaluated the information in Dr. Bird's declarations and have assessed it. We do not need to, doesn't require changes to our results, our seismic update. And the NRC did conclude they did not agree with interpretations and results from that March filing. And they conclude that PG&E's 2015 hazard and 2018 risk assessments remain valid and are adequately characterizing the seismic hazard and risk for Diablo Canyon.
Can I respond? The response we received from the review board indicates a number of serious misconceptions initiated their whole analysis, and we intend to follow that up with NRC in the coming weeks.
Gerald, please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure people were aware that as part of the 2.206 petition that was filed on behalf of Dr. Bird, that the NRC has now scheduled a follow-up public meeting for June 25th from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. So, and that's it.
Thanks. I know we're over time, but I do want to give anyone the opportunity to comment. Chris, if anyone else has questions or comments, please raise your hand.
Hey, I just had a quick question. Is the IPRP planning to officially review Dr. Bird's contentions? I remember with the Hamilton conventions, there was some review of that model as documented in IPRP report number 8. So I was wondering if there was a plan to formally address the contention.
Gordon, I'm going to defer to you on that.
Yeah, I would say we might want to wait till after this NRC meeting and then respond to that. I think our priority now is to have a formal review report of the update, but certainly we'll be watching to see where this leads, and then we'll have an opinion. At this point, since we're running out of time, I just want to throw in a thanks to. I noticed many people in this meeting that did the actual work. Like the work on the Casmalia Fault or Sam Johnson's group on the offshore work that we're just reviewing. But I think I'd like to take advantage of having them here. And I had a quick question for Ian McGregor. He's the first author on the Casmalia Fault paper. And just to follow up on a statement that Chris made about that rate perhaps being too high because the dates may be too young. Can you respond to that, Ian?
And as we make this transition, this is Bruce, I have to jump to another meeting, but okay. I endorse Gordon's approach on Dr. Bird's. I think that sorts out the issues and we can comment on the analysis there. So unfortunately have to go, but it's been an interesting discussion. Y'all take care.
Thanks.
Thanks, Bruce.
Hey, Gordon, this is Ian. Yeah, thanks for the question. So the question is directed towards our age constraints, whether we think the IRSL dates are too young. For our study, I think that's an interesting avenue to look into. We've done some follow-up work dating marine terraces further along the coast in Lompoc area and comparing them to radiocarbon dates, and I've seen some good correlation. And I know Nate is currently dating Cayucas Terrace and comparing those to the uranium ages from the mid 90s, but yeah, that's about as much as I can say about the uncertainty in the age control for the
Yeah, just my experience with OSL dating is usually that they're too old. I mean, if they were too young, that would probably imply that there's less defects in the minerals that you're dating, and so they cannot accumulate electrons. Is that true?
Yeah, that's partly why we use IRSL instead of OSL, because of the quartz is too young, so we use feldspar grains.
Right.
And that's a common practice that's been used in California in young uplifted terrains.
Right. Okay. I mean, I don't know if Chris Madugo has any comment on that, why it would be too young, or if there are analog areas where they're too young.
So I've used OSL and IRSL dating, but I'm not an expert in it. I have been trained in an OSL lab. One thing is moisture content over time, whether the current moisture content. So Gordon,
Yeah.
In terms of the terraces you're using to constrain, Ian, you must be using younger terraces because radiocarbon stops working at 40, 50,000 years. We're talking about terraces that are 100,000 years-ish.
Yes, yeah.
But yeah, we agree. It's a very interesting avenue to explore. And so that's why we're working with USGS on this. And also looking at multiple different luminescence dating techniques, some new ones that can take us back to 1 million years, but also can date really young deposits, and just find an age dating tool that can kind of span the full age range of late Quaternary features that we're interested in dating for fault studies. So again, USGS is already funded to work on that, and this is going to be a multi-year project.
Okay.
Bob Budnitz, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bob Budnitz. I'm a member of the Diablo Canyon Independent Safety Committee. And as you know, SB 846 asks us also to weigh in on these subjects, and we've been studying it carefully, including having studied the updated report, and then met with PG&E about some of their reactions to it a couple of months ago, and so we're on the stick to try to do that too. We have a public meeting coming up on June 2021, and you should know that on our agenda, it's likely to be on the second day, although you've got to watch for the agenda. On the agenda, we're going to devote some time to this topic, but it seems to me that we're not in a position yet to come up with a final understanding and therefore final conclusion on this. Well, nothing's final anyway, but anyway, even up to date, because as was just pointed out by Gordon Seitz, the NRC is going to have a meeting with Professor Bird on, let me look, on June 25th, which is a few days after our public meeting. And in any event, the IPRP told us an hour and a half ago that you're going to get a report out only by the end of June, although you might have an early version for us just before our public meeting.
Well, Bob, I mean, I laid out I had a discussion a while back.
I'm not complaining about any of it.
Yeah, with Bob Wrathy, who I saw here previously. But we're gonna. The plan is for us to get you a draft version of it ahead of your meeting so that you can review it. And I think like our final kind of polished up version probably won't be till slightly after yours. But we're supposed to have it for you before your meeting.
I understand, and that'll be very helpful. But because there's still more going on after, we're not liable to have a position there that would be as strong or as supportable as it would be, let's say, a month or two later when we've had the benefit of some more back and forth and understanding. Okay? I'm just telling everybody that I think that's the most likely outcome, that at our meeting on June 21, 2021, but it'll be probably on the second day, we're going to debate this, and we're going to have the public input, and we're going to hear from what they say, and we're going to take it all in. But I think at this stage, we're not likely to be able to come up with something then. I mean, and that's okay, you know, that this is an ongoing issue that we're trying to get to the bottom of.
I would just, I mean, you know, this is a problem that we're facing kind of across the board, that there's a lot of different agencies and groups involved, and not everybody's timelines line up, and it makes it really, this has all been very complicated for everybody involved. I would add that the DCISE's meeting after the June 20th and 21st meeting is October 9th and 10th. So just mark both of those on your calendar. And then we're not in the practice of setting the dates for the IPRP's future meetings. Ours will be, you know, typically we've been doing them in the fall, so October or November, depending on how everyone's schedule works out. John Caskey, I see you have your hand up, so please go ahead.
Thanks. I had my hand up, tried to put it up on the comments that Ian was making on the IRSL dating. And I want to make a shout out to Ian. Hey, Ian, how you doing?
Hey,
I haven't heard
John.
from you in a long time.
I know.
But
I gotta go.
anyway, Shannon Mahan has done a lot of luminescence dating for us down in the Mojave area. And I also had Glenn Berger do a bunch of OSL dating of marine terraces in the Bay region. And they the conclusion is that if you got Sierran source quartz, OSL is no good. And Shannon came to that conclusion. But the way around it is to do IRSL if you have the right deposit. So they're using the right approach up down at Casmalia. I just want to say that.
Right, but I guess my point is, until we can show that these are, I mean, this is a peer-reviewed study, and until we show that these are not correct, I think we have to consider the rates that are modeled, right?
Sure. Well, the model needs to be evaluated too.
That's probably the bigger issue.
Yeah, that's probably a bigger issue. That's my feeling, is that I just had a quick read of that stuff, and I thought that the luminescence ages seemed reasonable.
Right.
For the stratigraphic context. So I don't think that's where the major review might need, but it's a complicated structural model. I think Ian would probably admit to. So it does require some thinking about it and evaluating and review.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're a little almost 20 minutes over, so I will let everybody get back to it. But thanks everybody, and we'll definitely send the notice out for the next meeting. And if you have questions, you can always send them to us, and we can try to get back to you as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So thank you everybody, and please enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.